Hello, how are you doing? The sun is shining, which is great because I want to talk to you about the future. And I know what you're thinking. Some of you are thinking, uh-oh, Extinction Rebellion want to talk about the future. It's going to be all gloom and doom and disaster. But I want to actually try to give you a different take. But first of all, I want to know what you think. So when you think about the future, what does that future look like? Is it better or worse than today? Take a think about it. A lot of people saying worse. It can be quite uncomfortable for a lot of us. But I'm going to tell you about a positive vision of a future in which, in many ways, it's better than today. A future that we could get to if we come together and demand it. For most of my life, I've tried not to think too much about the future. There's been this dark cloud up ahead. Since I've been a teenager, since I was a teenager, I've known about climate change, I've been worried about it, and I've tried to do the sorts of things that people do when they try to reduce their personal carbon footprint. And every so often I've looked at the climate science and things have just been getting worse. But what could I do about it? And so I've focused on my work, on my family and friends. Occasionally I've had a drink. And I've tried to do other things. I've signed petitions, I've started campaigns, but none of that seemed to do anything. And so I focused on my work, my family, and I tried not to think about the future. But last summer, I spent a bit longer looking at the latest climate science reports, and I realized I couldn't do this anymore because we've left it too late. We don't have time. And I felt fear about what's coming. I felt sadness thinking about people now and in the future and about species that are going to be gone forever. And I felt anger, rage against the companies that are doing this, against our politicians for being so stupid. But most of all, I felt despair because it seemed there was nothing that I could do about it. But something else happened last summer. In a cafe in Bristol, 15 people got together, and like me, they'd been looking at the latest climate science and getting increasingly worried. But unlike me, they'd also been studying the history of social movements and how you bring about change and how you can do that peacefully using non-violent mass civil disobedience. And they decided to start a new campaign and to call it Extinction Rebellion. Yeah, Extinction Rebellion. And when I heard about it, I joined up straight away. It was like a lifeline. And pretty soon after I started going to meetings, I was arrested for the first time. And it was great. It was liberating and empowering, and I thought, for the first time in a long time, maybe, just maybe, we might be able to do something about this. And not just me, but we. I felt like I was a part of the community. If you talk to people who went to London in April to the International Rebellion, a lot of them will tell you it was the best week of their lives. But not because of the music or the street party, but because they felt they were part of something bigger. They felt a striving after something real and a sense of purpose, an incredible camaraderie with the other rebels under quite difficult circumstances often. And that's part of that positive future that we need to find, one in which our community makes us stronger and allows us to get through tough times. So the word has spread, and what started in a cafe in Bristol is now an international movement in over 70 countries around the world. And so we can help groups in places like Ghana, but also we can learn from their experience. And this movement has spread so rapidly around the world because people knew that it was needed. People have been waiting for this because change has to come. Now, why is it called a rebellion? It's a rebellion because we are in active rebellion against our government. Our government has not been protecting our interests. They have broken the social contract. So we will be in rebellion against them until they do. And why government? Why focus on government? Well, it's because it's government that has the power to pass laws to bring about massive change. There's a simple example of that we've all seen in the last few years. We have cut down the number of plastic bags that we use by tens of billions. Now, why is that? Did we all just wake up one day and decide, I'm not going to take a bag anymore? No. What happened was the government introduced a 5p tax on bags, and then we decided, well, maybe we didn't need the bag that much. And that's the power of government, but it requires the public to put pressure on the government to act. So that's what Extinction Rebellion is doing. We are putting pressure on the government. But it's not a polite pressure group. We don't have time for that. We have demands, and we will keep rebelling until those demands are met. And we have 3 demands. Tell the truth, act now, and go beyond politics. So let me tell you about those demands. What is this truth that we want the government to tell? It's the truth that scientists have been telling us for decades. It's the truth that school children are telling us as they take to the streets in their millions around the world, pleading for their future. It's a truth that we can all see now. Our climate is breaking down. The coral reefs are dying. The Arctic ice is melting. The Arctic is on fire. Last summer, the UK food harvest was down by 30% because of climate change. And meanwhile, we're losing 200 species every day, going extinct, and the Amazon is on fire. And I could go on, but I don't need to, because you know this is happening. Who's worried about climate change? Now. And for many of us, we try not to think about it. We may find that when the subject of climate change comes up, we just become numb. We hear the latest news and it seems to have no effect. And it's not that we don't care, perhaps it's that we care too much. And it's just too much to bear, it's too painful. And so we try to think about something else. But what we're saying in Extinction Rebellion is we're not going to think about something else, and we're not going to give up. And we need to tell the truth. And if you could relate to that feeling of maybe trying to look the other way and feeling at some level that there is this burden that has been getting heavier and heavier, I do have some good news for you. And that is that people who have gone through that and have faced the truth themselves, they find that actually, once they start that grieving process, it's like a weight is lifted off their shoulders. It is a massive relief. And they find that instead of relying on blind optimism, that they can find courage. And they find that their despair can be transformed to action. I think the biggest success of Extinction Rebellion so far is that it has allowed people to find a community. So people who felt like they were alone and had a one-way ticket to extinction now find themselves as part of a community amongst other people who care and in which we are all crew. So that's Extinction Rebellion's first demand, for the government to tell the truth and admit that we have a climate and ecological emergency. And not just national government, local government as well. So who knows, which was the first city in the UK to declare a climate emergency? Bristol! Yeah, yay Bristol. And which was the first university in the world to declare a climate emergency? Bristol! Yeah, yay Bristol. But while we're talking about Bristol, let's also talk about the city in Mozambique that Bristol is twinned with. That's a city called Beira. It's about the same size as Bristol, about 500,000 people. And in March, they had a cyclone that wiped out 90% of the city. Homes, schools, churches, hospitals, gone. And that's part of facing the truth about climate change, that this is not some event that's going to happen to us in 12 years' time or 20 years' time. It's a process, it's already started, it's here. And disasters, like in Beira, will keep happening, and they will happen more often in the future because of climate breakdown. But another aspect of the truth is that the future is not yet written. It depends on us. So now is not the time for us to give up and say, we're all doomed. Because our children and their children are counting on us. And there are no passengers on this journey. We're all crew. We have to take responsibility. So Extinction Rebellion are saying, we won't give up. We won't just stand by. We recognize that aspects of the future may look bleak, but also that we have agency. We can do something. And we can still stop further mass extinction. We can still slow down climate change. We can still preserve a livable habitat for future generations and billions of people. And we can still bring about a more positive kind of future. And some aspects of that future may even be better than today, but only if we act now. So that is Extinction Rebellion's second demand. We want the government to act now to tackle the ecological crisis and to bring down carbon emissions to net zero by 2025. And that's going to require some radical changes. We're going to have to change a lot of the things about the way we live today. We have to change things we eat, the way we travel, what our houses look like. But many of those changes are going to make our lives better. They're going to lead to healthier cities and healthier people and warmer homes and stronger communities. Today, we spend £12 billion every year giving subsidies to the fossil fuel industries that are bringing about our destruction. If we were to take that money and put it into local community energy projects, then we could be self-sufficient in our energy production. We could power the country all year round, 24/7, using renewable energy. And if we were to change the way we produce food, if we were to manage our land better and reduce waste, and yes, eat less meat and dairy, then we could actually be virtually self-sufficient in the food that we grow. And that would make us healthier, and we'd actually be able to do that using less land for agriculture than we use currently. And so the remaining land could then be given back to nature. And that would give us more places to go to get back in touch with nature, but also by allowing nature to restore itself, we can start the process of drawing carbon back out of the air and locking it up in trees, in soil, in peat, in mangrove swamps. It's going to take a lot of people, a lot of resources, but it's something that can be done very rapidly. About a month ago, in Ethiopia, they planted hundreds of millions of trees in a single day. So we can do this. We have the technology, we have the know-how. If we do it right, then acting green will always be the easy thing to do. There'll be lots of new jobs in renewable energy and regenerative agriculture, and the people working in those jobs will have the satisfaction of knowing that they are making a better world, which is not something that all of us can say at the moment. So we can do this. The challenge is political will, because things like community energy projects, they're good for local people, they're not so good for the fossil fuel companies that have way too much influence over our politics. So we need to go beyond politics. So that's our third demand, go beyond politics. Politics has failed. We need to let the people sort this out. And what that means is we want a citizens' assembly. So let me tell you a little bit about what that is. It's a little bit like a jury. You choose people randomly, or almost randomly, so that the assembly is like a microcosm of society. Its characteristics match the population with respect to things like age, and race, and gender, and socioeconomic background, and so on. And everyone who participates is paid for their time, so there are no barriers. And then they hear evidence from experts, they talk about it with a facilitator to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, and they make recommendations. And then they go home, and that's it. Job done. There's no coming back, no reselection. And this is something that has been used increasingly throughout the world in recent years, and it works really well. It can allow places to solve problems that politicians haven't been able to. A good example of that is in Ireland. So you might be aware that until very recently, women in Ireland have not been able to get an abortion legally. Here's an interesting fact. In the history of the Irish Parliament since 1922, the percentage of seats won by women has been less than 6%. So a few years ago, they decided to try having a citizens' assembly to discuss whether women should have reproductive choice. And they had an equal number of men and women. And what do you know? When they discussed it calmly and rationally, they decided overwhelmingly that yes, women should have the choice. And so that led to a change in the law, and now women in Ireland, as in the UK for a long time, can legally have the choice about whether to have a baby. And something similar happened with same-sex marriage. The Citizens' Assembly decided overwhelmingly in favour. There was a confirmatory referendum, and then the law changed, and so gay and lesbian people have the same marriage rights as heterosexuals. So when you have decision makers that are more representative, then you get decisions that are a better reflection of what society really wants. Now, they also had a citizens' assembly in Ireland about what to do about climate change. And they came up with some interesting recommendations. Here are some of them. They suggested retrofitting buildings and putting solar panels on them. Right. Encouraging communities to have renewable energy projects. Massively increasing the number of bus lanes, cycle lanes, park and ride facilities. Government supporting the transition to electric vehicles. And spending at least twice as much on expanding public transport as on building new roads. Okay, so we like those too. Now here's an interesting one. 80% of people in the Assembly said that they would be willing to pay a carbon tax, kind of polluter pays tax, provided it was implemented fairly. So those are things that ordinary people in Ireland said we should do to tackle climate change. So all we're asking is that people in the UK should have the same opportunity. Maybe they'll come up with different recommendations, but whatever they are, those recommendations should then be passed into law without the government having the opportunity to water them down on behalf of vested interests. But imagine this. What if we were to start using citizens' assemblies for other important issues? What if we were to replace the House of Lords with a citizens' assembly? Imagine the effect that we could have on inequality. We live in a society in which the richest 1% own half of England. And you don't have to be a raving socialist to recognise that is not a good thing. There's decades of social science research showing that level of inequality has a terrible impact on crime and educational attainment and public health, physical health and mental health. So why hasn't our Parliament done more about tackling inequality? Could it have anything to do with the fact that 3/4 of cabinet ministers are millionaires? In a citizens' assembly, the richest 1% would make up literally 1%. So their voice wouldn't be able to drown out the voices of people on average incomes, or indeed those with no income at all. So there's a positive vision of the future, a world in which we have greater equality, less pollution, less waste, more livable cities with better public transport that are easier to cycle and walk around, cleaner air, healthier, happier citizens. We have greater energy independence. We grow more of our food locally. We have more wild spaces and a deeper connection with nature. We're starting to reverse climate change by drawing carbon out of the air. And we have stronger communities, and we are rediscovering our connection with each other and rediscovering our power and making decisions that are representative. So that future is possible. I wouldn't say it's likely. At the moment, it looks like a long shot. There are some very powerful interests lined up against it. And that's why we have turned to mass civil disobedience, because history tells us that the only way we are going to get that future is by demanding it. And that's why over 1,000 people were arrested in London in April. Parliament has started listening. They've said that we can have a citizens' assembly on climate change, but they've said that it'll be a purely consultation exercise, a talking shop. They won't be led by it. So we're going to push harder to get our demands met in full. In Bristol, they're talking about expanding airports. Should we expand Bristol Airport? I hope Marvin is listening. At the same time, there are politicians telling us, keep going, push harder, force us to act. And there are police officers, including senior police officers, voicing their support. We are close to a social tipping point. And when we get past that point, change will come fast. So on October 7th, we are going back to London and we are taking our message directly to Parliament. We're going to be there even if the politicians aren't. Who's coming? Yeah, good. Whatever happens, we will make history, because this will be the biggest act of mass civil disobedience this country has ever seen. So we're rebelling for life, and we need everyone. That doesn't mean that everyone needs to get arrested. Many of us will, and maybe some of you will too. But there are many ways that you can help. It could be making banners, making music, writing press releases, talking to your friends and spreading the word. Maybe giving donations to fund things like legal expenses. The key thing is to do something, get involved, because that's the critical distinction. It's not between those who get arrested and those who don't. It's between those who do something and those who do nothing. So please, do something, get involved. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, you feel like you can't do anything, then don't suffer alone, join a community. And remember that action is the antidote to despair. So, a century ago, there was a radical change to the law in this country. For the first time, women were able to vote. And that didn't just happen. That was the result of a sustained campaign over many years. And for most of that time, there were no political parties in support. And newspaper editorials said things like, women are too emotional, too irrational to be able to think about politics. They couldn't have the vote. But in 1908, on the other side of the Downs here, 10,000 people assembled to demand women's right to vote. And some of them went on to be arrested, some of them went to prison, but they didn't give up, and eventually they triumphed and the world changed. So when you think about the future, what could the future look like? Could it be better than today? Together, we are powerful. We can change the world. We can still bring about that more positive future. Remember, we're all crew, we need everyone, and we need everyone to take responsibility. We can do this, so please join the rebellion. Take a flyer, visit our website, xrbristol.org.uk, come to a meeting. We welcome everyone and every part of everyone. Thank you. October 7th.
Thank you so much, Professor Colin Davis. A huge round of applause. Thank you for being with us and for sharing your story.